This is exactly what happened to Alexander Blackwood, a tech mogul worth $3,700,000,000, who found himself facing the unthinkable just 3 months after his wedding day. An unmarked envelope delivered to his office contained evidence of his new bride's hidden past. Documents that painted her as someone who had systematically deceived vulnerable people for financial gain. By sunset that day, divorce papers were being drafted. By midnight, everything Alexander thought he knew had been completely transformed. In the darkness of their mansion's library, as the grandfather clock struck 12, Vanessa Blackwood revealed a truth so unexpected that it changed not just their marriage, but Alexander's entire understanding of love, trust, and what it means to truly know someone. When I first met her, I was captivated by her authenticity, Alexander would later confess. The greatest irony is that I fell in love with her authenticity, threatened divorce over what I perceived as deception, only to discover her truth was far deeper than I could have imagined. Have you ever had a moment where a single truth changed everything you thought you knew about someone you loved? A revelation that forced you to reevaluate not just who they were, but who you were in relationship to them? If you're ready to discover a story of betrayal, redemption, and unexpected truth that challenges our very perception of honesty in relationships, hit that subscribe button and join me on this journey through one of the most remarkable love stories I've ever encountered. Alexander Blackwood wasn't born into wealth or privilege. At 22, armed with nothing but a computer science degree and a vision for revolutionizing data security, he launched Apex Innovations from his parents' garage in Palo Alto. The early days were defined by 18-hour workdays, instant ramen dinners, and sleeping on a worn couch between coding sessions. I lived on caffeine and determination, Alexander once told Forbes magazine. My first server was cobbled together from parts I dumpster dived behind a local tech company. I couldn't afford the equipment I needed, so I built it myself. His breakthrough came 3 years later when his encryption algorithm caught the attention of major financial institutions. What started as a 4-person operation expanded to 50 employees within 6 months. By 30, Alexander had moved Apex Innovations into a gleaming headquarters in San Francisco, employed over 500 people, and completed an IPO that valued the company at $800 million, 0 cents. 7 years later, Apex had diversified into artificial intelligence, biometric security, and quantum computing, with Alexander's personal worth estimated at $3,700,000,000, 0 cents. The garage startup had transformed into America's fastest-growing tech empire. Alexander's approach to work bordered on obsessiveness. He typically arrived at the office by 5:30 a.m. and rarely left before 10 p.m. Holidays were viewed as inconveniences, and vacations were working trips disguised as time off. His calendar was scheduled in 15-minute increments, with even meals optimized for productivity. Alex's dedication is unmatched, said Regina Davidson, his executive assistant for 8 years. But that intensity came with costs. He'd achieve incredible milestones, closing a billion-dollar deal or launching a revolutionary product, and barely pause to acknowledge it before moving to the next goal. His penthouse apartment overlooking the bay showcased impressive architecture and design, but contained no personal photographs. His collection of awards gathered dust in storage. Despite gracing the covers of business magazines and being named Ernst & Young's Entrepreneur of the Year twice, Alexander confided to close associates that success felt hollow. "I built exactly what I set out to build," he admitted during a rare candid moment at a leadership retreat. Yet I found myself wondering why I'd wanted it in the first place. Those who worked closely with Alexander described a man of fascinating contradictions. His analytical mind processed information with computer-like efficiency, yet he relied heavily on gut instinct for major decisions. In meetings, he listened more than he spoke, absorbing every perspective before delivering clear, concise directives that cut through confusion. Working with Alex was both exhilarating and intimidating, noted James Park, Apex's former chief technology officer. He could spot a flaw in your logic before you finished your sentence. but he never made you feel small for the mistake. He expected excellence, but provided resources to achieve it. His leadership style commanded fierce loyalty from his team, though his emotional detachment created a certain distance. Alexander approached problems with surgical precision, compartmentalizing feelings that might cloud judgment. This calculation extended to business relationships. Partnerships and acquisitions were evaluated solely on merit, with sentiment viewed as a liability. In negotiations, Alex is a chess grandmaster, observed Sophia Chan, Apex's general counsel. He's thinking 10 moves ahead while you're still deciding your opening strategy. What looks like cold detachment is actually focused concentration. Despite his achievements and wealth, Alexander's personal life remained remarkably empty. His minimalist penthouse felt more like a hotel suite than a home. Weekends were extensions of weekdays. Relationships remained brief and superficial, typically lasting only a few months before fading away. Something was missing, confessed Marcus Reeves, Alexander's roommate from Stanford and one of his few genuine friends. Alex had built an empire, but had no one to share it with. All those accomplishments, and his apartment didn't even have proper furniture because he spent so little time there. When asked about personal goals in interviews, Alexander redirected to company milestones. His calendar revealed a man actively avoiding downtime. Charity events were chosen for networking potential, not personal meaning. Exercise was scheduled for health optimization, not enjoyment. The void became more apparent after his 35th birthday, when Alexander began turning down speaking engagements and social invitations. Those closest to him noticed subtle changes: longer glances at families and restaurants, uncommon hesitation when discussing future plans. Never admitted it outright, Regina recalled, but I think he began questioning whether he'd built the right life. All that success meant nothing because he had no one who truly knew him, not just his achievements or bank account. The annual Children's Future Foundation Gala wasn't an event Alexander typically attended. Charity functions usually meant enduring hours of superficial conversation and thinly veiled attempts to access his wealth or influence. But Regina had insisted this cause aligned with Apex's community initiatives, so he reluctantly agreed to make an appearance. Alexander was checking his watch, calculating how soon he could leave without appearing rude, when he noticed a woman across the ballroom. Unlike the others in designer gowns competing for attention, she wore a simple navy dress and was deeply engaged with an elderly donor, listening with genuine interest. I wasn't actually introduced to Vanessa, Alexander later recounted. I overheard her passionately explaining a therapy program for children recovering from trauma. Her eyes lit up when describing how these kids transformed through proper support. I found myself walking over before I realized what I was doing. Their first conversation lasted nearly 2 hours, causing Alexander to miss 3 scheduled networking opportunities. When they finally exchanged contact information, he did something entirely out of character. He personally texted her the next morning rather than delegating the follow-up to his assistant. Vanessa Harper had built her reputation as one of the Bay Area's most respected child psychologists. After completing her doctorate at Stanford, she dedicated her career to helping children process and recover from traumatic experiences, specializing in cases many colleagues considered too challenging. Children who experience trauma often lose their voice, Vanessa explained during an interview with a mental health podcast. My job isn't to speak for them, but to create safe spaces where they can find their own words again. Her innovative therapy approach combined traditional methods with art and play techniques she had developed. The Children's Hospital, where she maintained a practice, had documented remarkable success rates, particularly with survivors of abuse and neglect who had been unresponsive to standard treatments. What made Vanessa extraordinary wasn't just her clinical skill, noted Dr. Amelia Richardson, the hospital's chief of psychology. It was her ability to connect with children others had given up on. These kids intuitively sensed she genuinely cared about their healing, not just their diagnosis. Beyond her clinical work, Vanessa had established a foundation, providing therapy scholarships for families unable to afford mental health services. She lived modestly, in a small apartment near the hospital, investing most of her income back into resources for her patients. Their courtship defied Alexander's methodical approach to life. Their first official date, dinner at a quiet neighborhood restaurant rather than the exclusive venues he typically frequented, extended from 7 p.m. until the staff began closing at midnight. I still remember him saying he'd never had a 5-hour dinner before, Vanessa shared with her friend Elena. He seemed surprised that conversation could be so engaging that he forgot to check his phone even once. Weekend getaways soon followed. A cabin in Big Sur where they hiked coastal trails, a small inn in Napa with no itinerary beyond conversation and connection. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, Alexander was fully present. His legendary focus directed entirely toward understanding the woman before him. Their discussions ranged from childhood memories to philosophical debates about human nature and resilience. Alexander found himself sharing thoughts he'd never verbalized, doubts about his life's direction, questions about what truly constituted success, memories of his parents' struggles before his company succeeded. With Vanessa, I could remove the armor I'd worn for so long I'd forgotten it wasn't my skin, Alexander confessed to Marcus months later. She wasn't interested in my business acumen or bank account. She wanted to know who I was beneath all that. What bewildered Alexander's inner circle was Vanessa's complete disinterest in the trappings of his wealth. When he sent a luxury car to pick her up, she politely requested a regular vehicle next time. When he offered elaborate gifts, she suggested donations to her foundation instead. She challenged me constantly, Alexander recalled. Not in a confrontational way, but by asking questions that made me reconsider perspectives I'd held for decades. During a heated debate about corporate responsibility, Alexander defended maximizing shareholder value while Vanessa advocated for balancing profit with social impact. Rather than becoming defensive when she disagreed with him, a reaction that had ended several of his previous relationships, Alexander found her perspective refreshing. The people in my life had nodded along with my opinions for so long, I'd stopped testing my own thinking, he realized. Vanessa never pretended to agree just to please me. Her authenticity extended to every aspect of their relationship. She maintained her volunteer schedule despite their dating life. She spoke candidly about her own struggles and growth. Most strikingly, she insisted on paying her own way when possible, a gesture Alexander initially misinterpreted as pride, before recognizing it as genuine independence. 6 months into their relationship, Alexander arranged a weekend in Monterey. At sunset on a secluded beach, he knelt in the sand with an 8-carat diamond ring, custom designed to honor her preference for simplicity despite its extraordinary value. When she didn't immediately say yes, my heart actually stopped, Alexander admitted. For 3 seconds, that felt like hours, she just looked at the ring with an expression I couldn't read. Regina, who had helped orchestrate the proposal, observed that momentary hesitation. It was subtle, just a flash of something crossing her face. Then she smiled and said yes, but that brief pause felt significant. When asked later about that moment, Vanessa simply said she was overcome with emotion. Yet those closest to the couple couldn't help wondering what thought had caused that fleeting shadow. Their wedding transformed Alexander's Lake Tahoe estate into an elegant wonderland. Despite his wealth allowing for unlimited extravagance, the ceremony reflected Vanessa's influence. Meaningful rather than ostentatious, with donations to children's charities in lieu of favors. Business publications buzzed about the tech mogul who had finally been captured. Industry insiders noted unprecedented changes in Alexander's schedule. He now left the office by 6 p.m. most days and had even begun taking weekends off, behaviors previously unimaginable. The first 3 months of marriage revealed a transformed Alexander. The man known for prioritizing achievement above all else now scheduled his meetings around Vanessa's important therapy sessions so he could hear how they went. The executive, who tracked minutes as currency, now spent hours cooking dinner with his wife, learning to enjoy the process rather than just efficient outcomes. They seemed perfectly matched, observed their regular chef, who found himself with reduced hours as the couple preferred preparing meals together. Mr. Blackwood looked younger, more relaxed. Mrs. Blackwood brought out a playfulness no one knew existed in him. It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon at Apex headquarters. Alexander was reviewing quarterly projections with his executive team when his assistant stepped into the conference room. An interruption she knew was permitted only for genuine emergencies. "I'm sorry to disturb you, Mr. Blackwood," Regina said quietly, "but a courier just delivered this. He insisted it was urgent and required your personal attention." The unmarked manila envelope bore no return address, just Alexander's name handwritten in black ink. The courier had vanished immediately after delivery, refusing to provide information about its origin. Security protocols dictated suspicious packages should be screened, but something about Regina's expression suggested this was different. "The security team already checked it," she explained, anticipating his question. "It passed all safety protocols." Alexander dismissed his team and waited until the door closed behind them. He carefully opened the envelope, expecting perhaps a confidential acquisition proposal or sensitive investor information. Instead, he found himself staring at documents that would shatter the foundation of his marriage. "I remember his face changing," Regina later recalled. "In 15 years working for him, I'd never seen that expression before. Something fundamental shifted in that moment." Inside were meticulously organized materials. Bank statements showing suspicious transaction patterns, court documents, and surveillance photographs. Each item was labeled with yellow sticky notes highlighting key details and explaining their significance. The bank statements revealed a complex network of accounts under various business names, with transactions structured just below reporting thresholds. A classic money laundering technique. Large sums moved between accounts in patterns designed to obscure their origin, before ultimately flowing to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Belize. Court documents included partially redacted FBI investigative reports identifying Vanessa Monroe as a person of interest in multiple fraud investigations spanning 3 states. The most damning was a detailed case summary of a romance scam operation that had targeted wealthy, divorced professionals through exclusive dating services and social clubs. "The documentation was extraordinarily comprehensive," noted Thomas Brennan, the former FBI investigator Alexander would later consult. "This wasn't random information. It was carefully curated to tell a specific story about Mrs. Blackwood's past." Most disturbing were the photographs. Surveillance images showing a younger Vanessa meeting with known associates of an organized fraud ring. In one, she appeared to be exchanging documents with a man later identified as Richard Kensington, the suspected ringleader of the operation. Another showed her entering a bank carrying a distinctive blue folder, referenced in the financial records. The final page contained a handwritten note. "Thought you should know who you really married. Some people aren't who they claim to be." The evidence suggested a woman far different from the compassionate psychologist Alexander had fallen in love with. According to the documents, Vanessa Monroe had participated in elaborate schemes targeting emotionally vulnerable individuals, particularly wealthy divorcees seeking companionship. The operation's method was sophisticated: create deep emotional connections with victims before manufacturing emergencies requiring financial assistance. Victims would transfer funds, believing they were helping someone they cared about, only to have their partner disappear once sufficient money had been extracted. The investigation had apparently been abandoned 3 years earlier without formal charges, precisely when Vanessa Harper had first appeared in San Francisco and established her practice. The timing aligned perfectly with what would be expected of someone creating a new identity after abandoning criminal activities. The evidence characterized her as what we call a money mule, Brennan explained in his assessment, someone who moves fraudulently obtained funds between accounts to obscure the paper trail. The romantic connection was typically the entry point for accessing victims' finances. Alexander sat motionless at his desk for nearly an hour after reviewing all materials. The methodical, rational mind that had built a technology empire refused to accept the implications at first. There must be an explanation, perhaps identity theft or a malicious attempt to damage his reputation through his wife. Yet as he reviewed each document multiple times, the analytical part of his brain, the part that had made him a billionaire, began accepting the likelihood that the evidence was authentic. The transaction patterns were too consistent, the timing too precise, the photographs too clear to dismiss entirely. "I felt physically ill," Alexander confided to Marcus later. "It was like discovering the ground beneath you isn't solid after all. Everything I thought I knew about her became questionable. Every conversation, every emotion, every moment we'd shared, was any of it genuine?" Alexander's mind flashed back to their engagement. That moment of hesitation before she said yes. Had that been calculation rather than emotion? Had her disinterest in his wealth been an elaborate performance designed to allay suspicion? Was he simply her most ambitious target? Within 30 minutes of this realization, Alexander's emotional devastation gave way to the CEO mindset that had protected his company through countless challenges. He compartmentalized his personal anguish and activated the methodical problem-solving approach that had made him legendary in business circles. First, he called Harrison Wells, Apex's chief security officer and former military intelligence specialist. Without revealing specifics, he requested discreet verification of the document's authenticity. Next, he contacted his personal attorney to discuss potential legal implications, while asking that preliminary divorce documents be prepared as a contingency. Alexander then reviewed footage from his home security system, searching for unusual patterns in Vanessa's behavior. He created a secure digital vault containing copies of all evidence, accessible only through his personal biometric authentication. "When Alexander feels threatened, he doesn't lash out impulsively," observed Harrison. "He becomes extraordinarily strategic. I've seen him handle billion-dollar corporate crises with less precision than he applied to this personal situation." By mid-afternoon, he had established a comprehensive action plan with multiple contingencies. The man who had fallen deeply in love had temporarily stepped aside, replaced by the tactician who had dominated Silicon Valley through calculated decision-making and emotional discipline. This story takes an unexpected turn that shocked everyone involved, including the investigators who eventually pieced together the complete truth. What happened in that mansion when Vanessa returned home would challenge everything Alexander thought he knew about trust, perception, and what it truly means to know someone. Make sure you're subscribed so you never miss the conclusion of stories like these. The most profound revelations often come when we think we already know the whole story. Hit that subscribe button now, because what happens next reveals how quickly judgment can blind us to deeper truths hiding in plain sight. Alexander transformed his home office for the confrontation. The warm space where he and Vanessa had often shared late-night conversations over wine became an austere setting for what he viewed as the final chapter of their relationship. He meticulously arranged the evidence across his mahogany desk. Bank statements to the left, court documents centered, photographs fanned out on the right. A recording device sat unobtrusively in the corner, capturing whatever explanation she might offer. He dimmed the overhead lights and activated only his desk lamp, creating a focused pool of illumination on the documents. The shadows stretched across the room as afternoon faded to evening. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, San Francisco's skyline provided a glittering backdrop to the dissolution of his marriage. Alexander canceled his remaining meetings and sent his household staff home early, ensuring complete privacy. He positioned himself behind the desk, rather than in the comfortable seating area where they typically talked. The physical barrier was intentional, a clear signal that this was no longer a conversation between lovers, but a confrontation between opposing parties. The transformation was remarkable, Alexander's therapist would later note. He created a physical space that matched his emotional state, controlled, compartmentalized, and structured, for maximum advantage. When Vanessa returned from her hospital volunteer work, Alexander didn't greet her with their customary kiss. Instead, he sent a text requesting her presence in his office. This formality, unprecedented in their relationship, was his first tactical move. Alexander had rehearsed his approach while waiting. He would maintain absolute emotional discipline, applying the same dispassionate analysis that had made him feared in business negotiations. No raised voice, no accusations fueled by hurt. Just a methodical presentation of facts that would make denial impossible. When Vanessa entered the room, her smile faded as she registered the unusual setup and his expression. Alexander didn't invite her to sit. Instead, he gestured toward the documents without preamble. "I received some interesting information today," he said, his voice modulated to perfect neutrality. "I'd like to discuss it with you." His words were precise, chosen for maximum impact with minimum emotion. As she approached the desk, he observed her body language with hypervigilance, analyzing every micro-expression as one might study market indicators before a critical trade. "I planned each word like a chess move," Alexander later admitted. "I wasn't speaking as a betrayed husband, but as a strategist, determined to extract truth through calculated pressure." Alexander guided Vanessa through the evidence systematically, employing the same rigorous approach he used in high-stakes investor presentations. He began with the bank records, explaining the suspicious transaction patterns in technical detail. He moved to the legal documents, highlighting key passages with clinical detachment. "These accounts align perfectly with known money laundering techniques," he noted, pointing to specific transactions. "The FBI report identifies Vanessa Monroe as a key facilitator in financial fraud operations spanning 3 states. He saved the photographs for last, visual confirmation that made abstract allegations concrete. In one image, a younger Vanessa stood beside Richard Kensington, the alleged mastermind behind the romance scams. "This man has 16 fraud indictments across multiple jurisdictions," Alexander stated, laying out a condensed criminal profile he'd compiled that afternoon. "You appear quite comfortable in his company." Each piece of evidence built upon the previous, creating a comprehensive narrative of deception. Alexander framed his accusations as logical conclusions based on irrefutable documentation rather than emotional grievances. "I'm not interested in excuses or partial truths," he informed her. "I want a complete explanation for how the woman I married appears to be intimately connected to criminal enterprises targeting vulnerable individuals. Precisely the population you claim to protect in your work." Alexander had anticipated tears, perhaps explosive anger or desperate denials. He'd prepared counter-arguments for various emotional responses. What he hadn't expected was Vanessa's composure. She examined each document thoroughly, her expression revealing nothing beyond intense concentration. Her hands remained steady as she studied the photographs. No defensive posturing, no immediate protestations of innocence, no collapse into emotional pleading. After reviewing everything, she looked directly into his eyes with a gaze that contained neither guilt nor indignation, just a profound calm that temporarily unsettled his carefully constructed approach. "May I sit down?" she asked simply. Alexander nodded, momentarily disoriented by her self-possession. He had prepared for a defendant scrambling to construct a defense, not this poised woman who studied him with unsettling steadiness. "You've been thorough," she observed, her voice level. "I understand why you've drawn these conclusions." This acknowledgement, not a confession but not a denial, disrupted his script. Alexander had expected the confrontation to follow familiar adversarial patterns. Instead, Vanessa's response suggested she was navigating an entirely different conversation than the one he had orchestrated. Her reaction was extraordinary, Alexander later told his closest friend. She regarded the evidence not as someone caught in deception, but as someone recognizing familiar elements of a story she already knew. As sunset cast long shadows across the office, Alexander delivered his ultimatum. His attorneys had already drafted preliminary divorce papers, Financial settlements had been calculated. Security protocols for her immediate removal from his residences and company properties had been arranged. "I won't be another victim of yours," he stated, his voice barely above a whisper. "My lawyers will contact you tomorrow. I want you out of this house by morning." He placed a prepaid phone on the desk between them. Her familiar devices would be considered compromised and subject to forensic examination. "You'll find the contact information for a hotel where a suite has been reserved in your name," he continued. "Your personal items will be packed and delivered there tomorrow. The credit cards and accounts in your name have been frozen pending investigation." The measures were comprehensive, designed to contain any potential damage while severing their connection completely. Alexander had created an airtight exit strategy that protected his assets, reputation, and company while cutting Vanessa out of his life with surgical precision. Vanessa listened without interruption. When Alexander finished, she didn't reach for the phone. She didn't protest the severity of his response or attempt to challenge his assumptions. Instead, she asked for one thing that he hadn't anticipated. "Give me until midnight to tell you everything," she said quietly. "After that, if you still want me gone, I'll disappear from your life forever." The request was disarmingly simple, specific, time-limited, and reasonable enough that refusing would make him appear unreasonable. It acknowledged his authority to make the final decision while creating space for information that might alter his perspective. Alexander hesitated, his strategy momentarily disrupted. His instinct was to refuse. Additional time would only allow her to construct more elaborate deceptions. Yet something in her expression, a certainty rather than desperation, made him reconsider. "Until midnight," he agreed. "Not a minute longer." Vanessa nodded, then left the office without another word, closing the door gently behind her. For the next 4 hours, Alexander remained in his office, reviewing the evidence repeatedly while monitoring security feeds showing Vanessa moving through their home. She didn't attempt to leave or contact anyone. Instead, she went to their bedroom, retrieved something from her jewelry box, then spent time in her personal study before returning to the hallway outside his office. As each hour passed, Alexander's analytical mind raced through possibilities. What explanation could possibly account for such comprehensive evidence? What revelation could be significant enough to change his decision? Was there some angle he had missed? Some context that would reframe everything he had discovered? The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked relentlessly toward midnight, each passing minute heightening the tension. Alexander found himself growing increasingly uncertain as the appointed hour approached. Whatever Vanessa planned to reveal had given her remarkable confidence in the face of overwhelming evidence against her. At precisely 11:55 p.m., a soft knock at his office door announced that the moment of truth had arrived. The grandfather clock in the hallway began its solemn chime as Vanessa entered Alexander's office. 12 resonant tones marked the transition from one day to the next, and possibly the end of their marriage. Moonlight streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the evidence still arranged on the mahogany desk. Alexander had removed his suit jacket and rolled up his sleeves during the long wait, but his posture remained rigid, his expression guarded. Vanessa carried a small wooden box and a laptop. She placed both on the desk before taking the seat across from him. For several moments after the final chime faded, silence hung between them, a pause between chapters, the quiet before a revelation. Outside, fog rolled across San Francisco Bay, obscuring the lights of the city below. Inside, two people who had shared the most intimate parts of themselves now sat like strangers, separated by documents and distrust. "You said midnight," Alexander finally spoke, his voice steady despite the hours of tension. "Whatever you have to say, I'm listening." Vanessa took a deep breath, meeting his gaze directly. "Before I start, I want you to know one thing that remains true regardless of what you decide afterward. I have never lied about loving you." "What you found isn't wrong," Vanessa began, gesturing toward the evidence, "but it's incomplete. I was involved in those activities, but not willingly and not as a perpetrator. She opened the wooden box and removed several documents that hadn't been in the manila envelope, medical records, earlier court filings, and photographs that showed a younger Vanessa with bruises partially hidden beneath carefully applied makeup. The bank accounts existed, the meetings happened, the money moved through those channels, she acknowledged. But these records show only actions without context, effects without causes. She turned her laptop toward him, displaying financial records predating those in his evidence. Transactions showing her own accounts being systematically drained over several months. This is how it began, she explained. Not with me taking someone's money, but with my own finances being controlled. These aren't the actions of a predator, Alexander. They're the footprints of someone being hunted. Richard Kensington entered Vanessa's life during her final year of graduate school. 12 years her senior, he presented himself as a financial advisor specializing in helping young professionals establish themselves. Their initial professional relationship evolved into romance after several months. He was brilliant and charming, Vanessa explained, her voice detached as though describing a clinical case rather than her own experience. He took interest in my research, supported my career aspirations, and seemed genuinely committed to helping others. The transformation happened gradually. Richard suggested consolidating their finances for tax purposes, then began questioning her spending habits. He expressed concern about her naivety in professional relationships and offered to manage her communications. Her friends misunderstood him, he claimed, suggesting they limit contact with them. The isolation was so incremental I hardly noticed, Vanessa explained. He would praise my independence in one breath while subtly undermining it in the next. When we moved in together after graduation, I didn't recognize that my world had already shrunk to just him. She displayed text messages showing Richard's psychological tactics, oscillating between expressions of devotion and subtle threats, creating artificial crises that required her immediate attention and constant monitoring of her whereabouts and activities. By the time I realized something was wrong, he had access to every aspect of my life, she continued. My accounts, my professional contacts, even my medical decisions required his input. What looked like relationship integration was actually strategic control. What Richard orchestrated is called coercive control, Vanessa explained, her professional training evident as she detailed the psychological mechanisms at work. It's a pattern of behaviors that strips away autonomy through isolation, surveillance, and intermittent reinforcement. She described how abusers like Richard create dependency through artificial crises that keep their victims psychologically off balance. Their targets often appear to consent to or participate in activities while operating under duress. A psychological state similar to hostages, who develop survival-based compliance. The most insidious aspect is how it reshapes your perception, she continued. Gaslighting isn't just denying reality. It's replacing it entirely. Richard would create problems, then position himself as the only solution. He would manufacture evidence that others were untrustworthy, leaving him as my only source of validation. Through this manipulation, Vanessa explained, victims often become unable to distinguish between genuine choices and coerced compliance. Their decision-making becomes compromised by constant threat assessment, weighing consequences of non-compliance rather than exercising free will. What appears as willing participation from outside is actually survival adaptation, she noted. The same psychological mechanisms that help kidnapping victims survive captivity also operate in coercive relationships. You comply because resistance carries immediate penalties, while cooperation offers temporary safety. Vanessa's integration into Richard's financial operations began with small requests presented as favors, depositing checks, signing documents without reviewing them, making wire transfers explained as investments. When she eventually questioned a transaction that seemed suspicious, Richard's response escalated from dismissal to threats. That's when he showed me what he had created, she said quietly. Doctored emails making it appear I had initiated schemes. Photographs edited to place me in locations I'd never visited. Bank records with my signature that I didn't remember signing. When Vanessa attempted to leave him, Richard revealed his ultimate leverage. He had systematically built evidence, framing her as a willing participant in his operations. He had connections in law enforcement who would ensure charges against her if she didn't continue cooperating. Met showed me profiles of the women who had tried to leave him before, Vanessa explained. One was serving 8 years in federal prison. Another had lost custody of her children. A third had died by suicide after her professional license was revoked. The pattern became clear. Richard identified accomplished women with promising futures, established control through isolation and manipulation, then used their credentials and reputations to facilitate his schemes while building evidence to ensure their silence. Each time I considered escaping, he would demonstrate his reach, she continued. He once had a police officer friend pull me over just to remind me how many people were watching. My therapist suddenly dropped me as a client. After Richard made a single phone call, I was terrified. Vanessa told Alexander, producing a small flash drive from her pocket. But I wasn't just a victim. I eventually became an informant. She inserted the drive into her laptop, revealing encrypted communications between Vanessa and FBI agent Deanna Rodriguez, spanning 18 months. The timestamps aligned with periods documented in the evidence Alexander had received. When I realized I couldn't escape on my own, I took the greatest risk of my life, she explained. During a professional conference, I managed 10 minutes alone and approached a federal agent who specialized in financial crimes. The communications detailed how Vanessa had systematically gathered evidence against Richard and his network while appearing to remain under his control. She documented transactions, recorded conversations, and identified other victims while navigating constant surveillance and threats. For over a year, I lived a double life, appearing to comply with Richard's demands while documenting everything for the FBI, she explained. Each day brought the possibility of discovery and whatever consequences he had planned if I betrayed him. The final communications showed the operation culminating in coordinated raids that recovered millions in fraudulent funds and identified dozens of additional victims across multiple states. The case was dismissed against me in exchange for my testimony, Vanessa continued. Richard and 3 of his associates were arrested and charged with 37 federal counts. The evidence I provided was deemed crucial to the prosecution. However, the justice Vanessa had risked everything for never materialized. Richard was released on $2 million 0 cents bail through connections that should have been insufficient for his flight risk. Within 48 hours, he disappeared, likely fleeing the country with assets hidden offshore. The FBI placed me in a limited protection program, she explained. I changed my name from Monroe to Harper, moved across the country, and rebuilt my life with constant vigilance. I underwent therapy for trauma survivors while establishing my practice, helping children overcome their own traumatic experiences. For 3 years, Vanessa had lived with ongoing anxiety about Richard's potential return. Each unexplained phone call or unfamiliar face on her commute triggered fear responses. Her volunteer work and modest lifestyle weren't just personal choices. They were protection measures designed to maintain a low profile. I checked Richard's status weekly, monitoring for any sign he had been located, she said. The last update I received indicated federal authorities believed he had established a new identity in Southeast Asia. What I never anticipated was the connection to your world, Vanessa revealed, displaying a photograph showing Richard alongside a face Alexander instantly recognized. Victor Lang, one of his main business rivals, and a board member at Apex Innovations. Victor Long is Richard's maternal uncle, she explained. They maintained their connection through family channels even after Richard's criminal activities became known. Victor provided financial support and connections that helped Richard establish his original operation. The timing of the anonymous package now made perfect sense. It had arrived the day after Alexander had announced Vanessa as the head of the new Apex Foundation, which would bring significant public attention and visibility. Victor recognized me during the holiday party last month, Vanessa explained. He didn't approach me directly, but I noticed him watching me throughout the evening. When you introduced me to the board members, His handshake lasted a beat too long, a silent message that he knew exactly who I was. Rather than exposing her immediately, Victor had methodically compiled information to inflict maximum damage. The package wasn't merely designed to reveal Vanessa's past. It was crafted to destroy both her marriage and Alexander's trust in his own judgment. This wasn't just about me, she concluded. It was a strategic move against you, through me. Victor knew revealing my past would destabilize you emotionally and potentially impact Apex's leadership during a critical expansion phase. Dawn light had begun filtering through the windows as Vanessa shared her final truth. Tears streamed down her face, the first emotional display since the confrontation began. "I should have told you before we married," she acknowledged, her composure finally breaking. "I wanted to go so many times. But I was afraid. Afraid you wouldn't believe me. Afraid exposure would bring Richard back into my life. Afraid of losing the first real happiness I'd found." She reached across the desk, not quite touching Alexander's hand but close enough that he could feel her trembling. "I convinced myself that chapter was truly closed, that loving you wasn't putting you at risk," she continued. "I told myself the protection program had worked, that Richard was gone forever, that my past couldn't follow me here." Vanessa wiped away tears with steady dignity. "I was wrong to keep this from you. You deserve to know everything before committing your life to mine. But please understand, every moment of love between us was genuine. Every conversation, every dream we shared, every promise I made came from the truth of who I am, not from the circumstances that nearly destroyed me." As morning light illuminated the evidence spread across the desk, Alexander faced an impossible choice: to trust the woman he loved despite a past she had hidden, or to protect himself from what might be the most elaborate deception he had ever encountered. By dawn, Alexander's threats of divorce had transformed into fierce protectiveness. The tech mogul, who had built an empire through calculated risk assessment, now directed all his resources toward a single objective: ensuring Vanessa's safety while bringing down those who had threatened her. "Something fundamental shifted in him that night," observed Marcus, who arrived at the Blackwood residence hours after Vanessa's revelation. "The Alexander I knew would have protected himself first, managed the potential damage to his reputation and company. Instead, he was entirely focused on protecting her." Within 24 hours, Alexander had assembled a specialized team including former intelligence officers, cybersecurity experts, and private investigators. His home security system was completely overhauled. Vanessa no longer traveled without professional security, a measure she initially resisted but accepted when Alexander explained he would employ the same precautions for himself. "I failed to protect you once by not seeing the truth," Alexander told her. "I won't fail again." Alexander's investigation into Victor Langa began immediately, conducted with the same precision he applied to corporate acquisitions. Financial forensics experts traced connections between Langa investments and offshore accounts linked to Richard Kensington. Digital specialists recovered deleted communications. Former employees were interviewed under confidentiality agreements. "He approached it like the most important deal of his career," noted Harrison Wells, AFAX's chief security officer. "Except there was no negotiations or compromise, just absolute determination to uncover every connection between Lang and Kensington." Meanwhile, private investigators coordinated with international contacts to track Richard Kensington's movements across Southeast Asia, Europe, and eventually South America. Facial recognition systems flagged potential matches. Financial algorithms identified transaction patterns associated with his previous operations. Alexander personally reviewed daily reports, often spending hours in his home office analyzing data and adjusting search parameters. His legendary focus, once directed toward market domination, now centered on locating a man who had vanished 3 years earlier. "He became obsessed with protecting her," Harrison observed. "I'd never seen him so focused, not even during our most critical product launches." Alexander's security team established unprecedented coordination with federal authorities. His attorneys navigated complex legal channels to share evidence while protecting Vanessa's privacy. Former FBI agent Diana Rodriguez, who had worked with Vanessa during her informant phase, was brought in as a consultant. The Blackwood residence was equipped with military-grade protection systems. Vanessa's therapy practice received subtle but comprehensive security enhancements. Their digital communications moved to encrypted platforms. Alexander even postponed Apex's major product launch to maintain his personal involvement in these measures. "We essentially created a private-public partnership for one case," explained Thomas Brennan, who liaised between Alexander's team and federal investigators. His resources accelerated what might have taken agencies years to accomplish on their own. When Vanessa expressed concern about the extent of these measures, Alexander simply stated, "You spent 18 months gathering evidence while living under constant threat. You were braver than I've ever been. Now it's my turn to be brave, for both of us." Legal experts developed strategies for potential scenarios ranging from Richard's apprehension to Victor's removal from Apex's board. Every contingency was mapped, every vulnerability addressed with methodical thoroughness. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. A real estate transaction in Buenos Aires triggered an algorithm designed to identify Kensington's distinctive financial patterns. A property purchased through 7 shell companies utilized the same structural framework he had employed for previous hidden assets. Alexander's team deployed to Argentina within hours, coordinating with local authorities through diplomatic channels established by his international business connections. Surveillance confirmed Richard Kensington, now operating under the name Michael Reynard, was indeed occupying the property. The arrest occurred on a Tuesday morning as Kensington exited a cafe near his residence. Extradition proceedings began immediately, facilitated by evidence packages Alexander's legal team had prepared months in advance. When they brought him into custody, he seemed genuinely shocked, reported the operation leader. He had evaded authorities for years and clearly believed himself untouchable. Finding himself surrounded by federal agents was apparently inconceivable to him. Federal prosecutors reopened the original case with enhanced charges including witness intimidation and flight to avoid prosecution. The evidence Vanessa had gathered years earlier, combined with new material from Alexander's investigation, created an airtight case, with potential sentences exceeding 30 years. Victor Lang's resignation from Apex's board followed a closed-door meeting where Alexander presented evidence of his involvement in both corporate espionage and witness intimidation. Rather than pursuing public charges that might have exposed Vanessa's past, Alexander negotiated a private agreement: complete withdrawal from Apex, liquidation of all holdings, and legal documents preventing future business relationships with any Apex partners. It was masterful, Sophia Chan, Apex's general counsel, later remarked. Alexander could have destroyed Victor publicly, but that would have drawn attention to Vanessa's history as a protected witness. Instead, he engineered a quiet exit that appeared to outsiders as a normal corporate restructuring. The business press speculated about the sudden departure of such a prominent board member, but Alexander's public explanation, citing strategic differences regarding future growth directions, was accepted without significant scrutiny. Victor Lange disappeared from Silicon Valley circles, reportedly relocating to Europe, where family connections offered him a comfortable, if diminished, position. Alexander's leadership team noted that this resolution demonstrated a new dimension to his decision-making. Where once he might have pursued complete victory, regardless of collateral damage, he now prioritized protection over punishment. Throughout these months of investigation and resolution, Alexander and Vanessa's relationship underwent a profound evolution. The initial shock and betrayal had given way to a deeper understanding that neither had anticipated. The experience transformed their relationship, observed Dr. Lydia Montgomery, a couples therapist who worked with them afterward. Ironically, this threat to their marriage created a deeper intimacy than they had before. The walls came down completely. Vanessa found herself supported in ways her previous experience had made unimaginable. Alexander discovered emotional resources within himself he hadn't recognized: patience, empathy, and the capacity to prioritize another's healing above his own needs. Their conversations extended late into many nights, no longer just about shared dreams, but about vulnerabilities and fears they had previously kept hidden. Alexander spoke about the isolation of success and his fear of being valued only for his achievements. Vanessa gradually shared more details about her survival mechanisms and the ongoing recovery from trauma. Before, they were two accomplished individuals who admired each other, Dr. Montgomery noted. After, they became partners who had seen each other's deepest struggles and chosen to remain connected despite them. Stories like these remind us that people are more complex than they first appear. Behind the carefully constructed identities we present to the world often lie experiences that have shaped us in ways others cannot imagine. Challenges overcome, battles fought in silence, and resilience developed through adversity. If you are finding value in these real-life lessons about judgment, perception, and the courage to see beyond surface appearances, hit that like button and share with someone who might need to hear this today. Sometimes the most important truth we can recognize is that few situations are as simple as they initially seem, and few people can be fully understood without knowing the journey that brought them to where they stand. 1 year after the midnight revelation, Alexander and Vanessa renewed their vows in a private ceremony attended only by their closest friends. The intimate gathering at a coastal retreat in Monterey held special significance. It was where Alexander had first proposed, where Vanessa had hesitated before saying yes, and now where they chose to reaffirm their commitment with full knowledge of each other's truths. Unlike their lavish first wedding covered by business publications, this ceremony remained unphotographed and unpublicized. Vanessa wore a simple white dress rather than a designer gown. Alexander forewent his usual tailored suit for more casual attire. They wrote their own vows, speaking words meant only for each other and their small circle of witnesses. But what makes this meaningful isn't just that they survived a crisis, observed Marcus, who served as best man. It's that they emerged from it with a relationship that's fundamentally stronger and more authentic than before. They're not recommitting to what they had, they're celebrating what they've become. The ceremony concluded with a tradition Alexander had researched from Vanessa's family heritage: the braiding of 3 cords representing their past, present, and future, woven together as a symbol of resilience and connection that grows stronger under pressure. The Apex Foundation launched 6 months after Richard Kensington's arrest with an initial endowment of $50 million, 0 cents from Alexander's personal fortune. Unlike most corporate foundations focused on broad social causes, Apex specifically targeted financial abuse, coercive control, and rehabilitation for victims of psychological manipulation. The foundation operated independently from Apex Innovations, with its own board comprised of experts in psychology, law enforcement, victim advocacy, and financial crimes. Its headquarters occupied a renovated building in downtown San Francisco, designed with security features that remained invisible to visitors but provided peace of mind to those seeking assistance. We built this to combine Alexander's business acumen with Vanessa's clinical expertise, explained the foundation's executive director. The result is an organization uniquely positioned to address these issues from multiple perspectives simultaneously. The foundation soon established partnerships with law enforcement agencies, financial institutions, and mental health providers across the country. Its first initiative, a comprehensive training program helping bank employees identify potential financial coercion, was adopted by 3 major banking groups within its first year. Vanessa assumed leadership of the foundation's clinical programs, developing protocols specifically designed for survivors of coercive relationships. Drawing from her own experience and professional training, she created assessment tools that helped identify subtle forms of control often missed by traditional domestic violence screening. Many victims don't recognize their own victimization, Vanessa explained during a closed training session for counselors. The most dangerous manipulators don't need physical violence. They create psychological cages that appear to have open doors. Her approach emphasized practical support alongside emotional recovery. Survivors received financial literacy training, career development assistance, and legal guidance to rebuild independence. Therapy protocols acknowledged the complex trauma of having one's perception and autonomy systematically undermined. Most revolutionary was Vanessa's insistence on centering survivors' agency throughout the recovery process. Rather than prescribing standardized treatments, programs were customized to individual needs and readiness, allowing each person to reclaim control over their healing journey. "The foundation doesn't rescue anyone," Vanessa noted in an interview with a mental health journal. "We provide resources and support that empower people to rescue themselves. That distinction matters profoundly." Within 18 months, the Foundation's programs demonstrated measurable impact. Their financial independence curriculum helped over 300 survivors establish credit, secure housing, and develop sustainable career paths. The legal advocacy program successfully overturned convictions for 15 individuals who had been coerced into criminal activity. Perhaps most significant was the Emergency Intervention System, a coordinated response network that helped 78 people safely exit controlling relationships during its first year of operation. This system combined immediate physical safety measures with long-term support services, addressing the primary reasons many victims return to abusers. "What makes our approach effective is continuity," explained the program director. "We don't just remove someone from danger temporarily. We stay engaged until they've established genuine stability and independence." The Foundation's research division published groundbreaking studies on coercive control tactics in the digital age, identifying how technology enables new forms of surveillance and isolation. These findings informed policy recommendations adopted by 2 state legislatures, considering expanded domestic abuse definitions. A confidential survey of program participants revealed the true measure of success. 84% reported feeling in control of my own life after completing Foundation programs, a profound achievement for individuals who had previously lost autonomy. Alexander's perspective on strength underwent a complete transformation through these experiences. The man who had built his identity on never showing vulnerability now spoke openly about how his understanding of courage had evolved. He defined strength as never needing help, never admitting doubt, never showing emotion, he acknowledged during the Foundation's inaugural gala. "My wife's courage taught me what true strength looks like. Standing up after being knocked down, trusting again after betrayal, helping others despite your own wounds." In board meetings, colleagues noted a fundamental shift in his leadership style. The analytical efficiency remained, but a new emphasis on psychological safety and personal well-being emerged. Executive reviews now included discussion of work-life balance alongside performance metrics. Company policies expanded to support employees facing personal crises. "My greatest weakness was believing I had none," Alexander told a graduating class during a commencement address. "True resilience isn't never falling. It's learning to rise with greater wisdom after each fall." This evolution extended to his personal life as well. He now dedicated Sundays exclusively to family time, phones off, emails unanswered. Friends remarked on his newfound ability to be fully present, rather than mentally reviewing business strategies during conversations. Vanessa's journey from victim to survivor to advocate completed a circle she never imagined possible. The woman who once lived in fear now led workshops empowering others to recognize and escape similar situations. Her clinical practice expanded to include training other therapists in trauma-informed approaches to coercive control. "Some secrets are destroyed when exposed to light," she reflected during a private interview. "Others finally begin to heal. The difference often comes down to whether you're met with judgment or understanding when the truth emerges." Her recovery wasn't linear. Certain triggers occasionally resurfaced, difficult emotions, but these moments no longer controlled her. She had developed what she called compassionate vigilance, remaining aware of potential threats without allowing fear to dominate her choices. Most remarkable was how she integrated her past into her present identity without shame. She occasionally shared carefully anonymized elements of her experience when helpful to clients, transforming her hardest moments into healing resources for others. The goal isn't to erase trauma from your story, she explained to a support group. It's to ensure trauma isn't the only story you have. Your identity can include what happened to you without being limited to it. Their story, though rarely shared in its entirety, has become something of a legend in Silicon Valley circles. Executives who witnessed Alexander's transformation share elements with trusted colleagues. Foundation employees speak reverently of the couple's complementary strengths. They represent a different kind of power partnership, noted a feature in Business Ethics Quarterly. Not two ambitious individuals pursuing parallel success, but two people who discovered that vulnerability shared becomes strength. Multiplied, young entrepreneurs study Alexander's business innovations while remaining unaware of the personal revolution that reshaped his understanding of success. Mental health professionals implement Vanessa's clinical protocols without knowing they originated in her lived experience. The billionaire who threatened divorce but ended up begging for a second chance at truly knowing the woman he married continues to serve as a powerful reminder that even the most successful among us have blind spots when it comes to the human heart. Their partnership demonstrates how relationships tested by fire can emerge stronger, not despite their challenges, but because of the courage required to face them together. At its core, Alexander and Vanessa's story illuminates the profound difference between judgment and understanding. When confronted with evidence of Vanessa's past, Alexander initially responded with judgment, a black-and-white assessment based on incomplete information. That judgment nearly cost him the most meaningful relationship of his life. Understanding requires something more challenging than judgment. It demands we look beyond surface facts to recognize complex human experiences that shape behavior. It asks us to consider context, motivation, and the full spectrum of circumstances before drawing conclusions about others. The truth rarely exists in absolutes, Alexander later reflected. Most human stories occur in shades of gray, areas where good people make difficult choices under impossible circumstances. This distinction applies far beyond romantic relationships. In business decisions, family dynamics, and community interactions, the impulse to judge quickly often overrides the patience required to understand deeply. Yet it's precisely this understanding that allows for genuine connection, meaningful growth, and ultimately wiser decisions. Perhaps the most powerful legacy of their experience is how it transformed their capacity for empathy, not just toward each other, but toward everyone whose lives they touch. What would you have done in Alexander's position? Faced with compelling evidence about a spouse's hidden past, would you have immediately sought distance and protection? Or would you have created space to hear the complete story before making judgment? Have you ever discovered something about someone that completely changed your perception of them? How did you respond at that moment? Did you allow this new information to erase everything else you knew about the person? Or did you integrate it into a more complex understanding of who they are? These questions aren't merely hypothetical. They reflect choices many of us face throughout our lives. When someone we love reveals aspects of themselves we didn't anticipate, our response shapes not only the relationship's future, but also our own capacity for compassion and growth. The most meaningful connections often emerge not from perfect alignment, but from the courage to stay present when differences and difficulties emerge. True intimacy isn't the absence of challenges, but the willingness to face them, together with openness and honesty. If this story touched you, make sure to subscribe to Milton Stories for more real-life tales that challenge our perceptions and touch our hearts. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts on trust, forgiveness, and second chances. Your experiences might provide valuable perspective for others navigating similar situations in their own lives.